Well, hello everybody. This is your pastor. I'm broadcasting from inside of our beautiful sanctuary. And the reason I'm doing this video address is because I gave a sermon a few weeks ago that I thought was very important for everybody to hear. And of course not everybody was here, so it was decided that I should probably do a video address. The sermon that I did was about our vision as a congregation and about our future. The questions, who are we? Who is God calling us to be, and how do we get there, are very, very important for us as Christians. You think about it in our own personal lives, those are the questions we really ask. Who am I now? Who's God calling me to be? And how do I get from point A to point B? Well, that's not just an important question for an individual, it's an important question for a faith community, for a group of Christians. And that's the question really that we're asking as a church, and that was the topic of my sermon. This all really began, I have to say, about a year ago when we were preparing for Vacation Bible School. Nobody had been in the basement for many weeks of our social hall, the basement down there. Nobody had been in there for a while because we don't do Sunday school in the summertime. And as we were going down to prepare for Vacation Bible School, we noticed some black stuff growing on the carpet and on the wall. Well, obviously we didn't want to hold anything down there. And we didn't know the extent of that, what was going on. As it turns out, the trustees were right on top of that. We got a company to come in, and I don't know if you know it or not, but the basement to the social hall down the hill has been entirely renovated. And we get testing done to make sure that it's safe, and it is extremely safe. We just had a test done, and our levels are almost non-existent of anything that would harm anybody. It's really, they've done a wonderful job. But what this did for us was it started a conversation about whether or not our current facilities are going to be adequate to lead us into the future. So what the church did was we formed a study group, and you've probably heard me and others talk a lot about the study group. The study group's job was to look at the needs of the community and look at the church and see how the church can meet the needs of the community, a growing community, in the future. Now, about the same time, what happened was the Waters property next to the church became available. It came up for sale, and I think had been for sale. But the study group then began to ask the question, look at our current facilities. We didn't know the extent of the damage at the time. We didn't know how much we'd have to remediate. And then we discovered we probably do need more space in the future. And then this property becomes available. So you can imagine, from a Christian standpoint, we're saying, is this God speaking to us, and this is what we need to do? Well, just in case it was, we began the process to purchase the property. Now, I want to talk about that for a moment. It doesn't mean that we felt like we should write a check the same day. Things don't move that quickly in the church, and they shouldn't, because it requires more discernment than that. But what the study group did was we had to move through this process to get congregational approval and also the approval of our denomination, the United Methodist Church, so that if the property did become available at the right price, we could cut the check and be done with it. You can understand, I'm sure, we couldn't first say, oh yes, we want to buy the property, and then tell the bank, okay, wait a minute, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, we're going to go through this 3-month process to gain approval to buy it. Can you wait? Probably not. So we moved through the process as though we were purchasing the property, just so we could have all of that done so that when the property came available, if it came up at the right price, we could buy it. As a result of all this, the Waters property issue, the house next to the church, as we've called it, really sort of dominated the communication that the study group had with the church. And I think that the church kind of thought that this was the only work that the study group was doing. They're just working on the Waters property. And that really is not the truth. The study group has continued to study the vision of the church and where we need to go in the future. And we've handed over the issue of the Waters property to 2 very capable members of our congregation. I want to speak about the Waters property, and then I'll get back to our vision. I think it's important that we talk about where we stand with that property. In the past, since we voted on buying the property and saying that we thought God was calling us to do that, There have been a variety of issues that have come up. Our folks from the congregation who are working on buying the property or exploring that possibility have made calls and then not had those calls returned. It's a very sensitive and in some ways confidential situation with what's going on with the owners of the property and the bank. So for a long time, I didn't have any more information than what you had. The study group didn't have any more information than what the rest of the church had. It sort of was hanging in limbo. And as it turns out now, the property is in foreclosure, as I understand, and we have a foreclosure specialist in our church who is still exploring the possibility of buying this property, but it has to be at the right price, and we're not going to pay a lot of money for something that's of no use to us. Having said that, we've not given up on the purchase of the property itself. But since we voted on buying this property, the study group handed that over to our realtors in the congregation, and the study group has continued to look at the future and look at the vision of the church, look at the needs of the community. Okay, if that's what we've been doing, where are we? I think it's fair that we communicate that now at this time. Again, we're looking to answer the questions, who are we, what is God calling us to be, and how do we get there? Now, on the surface, those seem to be easy questions to answer, but they're really not. It's something that requires absolutely everybody. We cannot move forward as a congregation, we determined in the study group, without hearing from each and every person in the congregation. So what we've done is we've formed a group of about 20 people to go out and talk to everybody in the church. When I say everybody, I mean everybody. We want to hear from members, we want to hear from non-members. Our shut-ins who don't always make it to church, we're going to go out and speak with them. Anybody who has any affiliation with Cokesbury, we want to talk to. Man, woman, child, everybody in between. So it's very, very important that we hear from each and every person. And as we listen to each and every person in the congregation, I believe that God is going to reveal to us God's preferable future for us. As we hear from every person in the congregation, we're going to be influenced, we're going to be challenged, we're going to be changed through God speaking through you. And then what we're going to do when we have all of this information, we're not going to say, well, so-and-so thinks we need to do this, and so-and-so thinks we need to do that. We're going to digest all this information. We're going to respect every opinion that is put forth. And what we're going to do is look for trends and look for God's voice and prayerfully discern what and where God is calling us to be and how do we get there. Now, speaking of this vision, I want to be very clear that a vision is something that is discovered. It's not something that is created. We don't create the vision. We don't say, this is what I think we need to do. That's focused on us. We don't want to be focused on us. We want to be focused on God. The Bible says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor for it labor in vain. I don't want to labor in vain. I want to labor for God. God knows what the vision is. We just have to discover it. The Bible teaches us that God says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and plans to give you a very, very bright future. So God's got the vision. It's up to us to uncover it or to discover it, not to create it. God's already got it. But until we get there, we're only left to trust that God is leading us, trust that God is in the process, and to search for clues. Some of the clues might be more obvious. Some of them might be a little bit less obvious. But I want to say that this process is absolutely vital to our future. We need all hands on deck for this. The book of Proverbs, which is a wisdom book, says that where there is no vision, the people perish. So I think the most important thing that you can do for your congregation and for your church now is to let your voice be heard. So at some point over the next couple of months, you'll be contacted by a person in the congregation. Be patient. We've got, I'm glad to say, about 200 people to interview who are affiliated with the church. So we've got a lot of people that we need to hear from. And I believe that God will speak to us. I believe that God is calling us to reach out and to share the very same thing that we've received. with the rest of the world, with the community of Abingdon. This is a message that's too good to keep to ourselves. This is a message of God's grace that's been shown to us that we need to in turn show to other people. The message really is too important to keep to ourselves. So I want you to do something for me. This is the last thing I'll ask you to do. I want you to trust that God is at work in this process. We're not perfect people. Our opinions are not perfect. We don't always hear God's voice perfectly, unfortunately. Sometimes we hear God's voice, but we do something else. But I want you to trust that God is in this process and trust that God is leading us and guiding us. And more than that, I want you to take that a step further and agree to pray with me every day for the future of Cokesbury, that God's plan for us would be uncovered. I asked in my sermon the same thing I'm going to ask you to do now in closing, and that is that you set your alarm every day for some time. I've got mine set for 2:32 p.m. And when that alarm goes off on my phone, I stop and I pray for Cokesbury and for our future. So I would ask that you just simply do the same, and when you are approached to give what you believe God has spoken to you, to the person who's going to be talking to you, I know that God will be involved in this process. So I do thank you very much for your time. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call me. The cell phone's a better way to reach me. I always have it with me, 443-617-5010. And of course, my email's in the bulletin. You can always contact me that way. So grace and peace to you until we meet again.